Hello and welcome. My name's Jo, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this small quilt. It's an ideal first quilt because it is very small and you don't need to do any cutting because you buy a charm pack. You buy a charm pack with 42 5-inch squares and that will make a quilt of this size. Obviously, if you decide you want to make a bigger quilt, then you can do 2, 3 or 4 charm packs, as many as you want, until you get the size of a quilt you would like. But in this video I'm just going to be showing you how to join the squares together. So let's get started.
Arrange your squares in an order that you would like, trying not to get two of the same together or two of the same on the same line or same row if possible. As you can see in row 4 I have got 2 of the seagull squares on the same row, but I'm okay with that. Next, take your second column pieces and place them with right sides together on top of your first column pieces. I'm kind of working upside down a bit here, but I've started at the top of column 2 and worked down to the bottom, and that's my column 1 and 2. Then I take column 3 and 4 and fold column 4 over with right sides facing on top of column 3, and I put a label on so I know which column's which. And then I do exactly the same with column 5 and 6. I take all of column 6 and fold them over column 5 with right sides facing, and then put a label next to it so I don't get mixed up. Then starting at the bottom of column 1 and 2, I place the pairs on top of each other. So starting with the bottom pair on top of the next pair, then pick those up and put those on top of the next, and keep going till I get to the top, which will actually be the first pair. And then I put my label back on and I clip them together with a clover clip just to keep them together for now. And then I do exactly the same with columns 3 and 4, starting at the bottom, placing them on top of each other all the way up to what is the top actually. So I end up with the bottom row on the top and the top row at the bottom. And then I go ahead and do exactly the same with columns 5 and 6, starting at the bottom and working my way up to the top. So I'll end up with my top pair actually on the bottom for now, and then clip them together, and they're all ready for pinning your pairs together. Then starting with columns 1 and 2, pin your pairs together. Refer to your photograph that you took to make sure you're pinning on the right side. So in my case, I need to pin on the right hand side as they're facing me. So I take my first pair, make sure they're right sides facing, which they should be, match them up nicely, and then put a pin or clip or several pins and clips, depending on what you prefer, on the right hand side. I'm just going to pin with one pin, and that is my first one done. Move on to the second one and do exactly the same. Match them up the best you can. Make sure you've got right sides together and pin on the right hand side. Continue to do the same to all of your first 2 columns. I like to do just 2 columns at a time, so I pin my first 2 columns together, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. At the sewing machine, join our first 2 squares together, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sewing all the way down to the end, and when we get to the end we're going to do a couple of extra stitches, and then we're going to add our next 2 pieces. So I lift the foot and just get them just under the foot, and then carry on sewing down our next 2 pieces. This is called chain piecing, and we're going to do the first and second column in this way. So again, when I get to the end, I'm going to go a little bit past the end, do a couple of extra stitches, and then I'm going to add my next piece or 2 pieces, and I'm going to continue like this till I've done all of the first and the second column. I repeat the process of pinning the 2 squares together from columns 3, 4, 5 and 6, and joining them together by chain piecing them in exactly the same way as we did the first 2 columns. Then using a small pair of scissors or a pair of snips, separate your pairs of squares. Here I'm doing columns 5 and 6. I've already done 1, 2, 3 and 4. And here are all my columns joined together in pairs. I now need to take 1 pair from each of the columns and join them together. So I take 1 from column 2 and 3, 1 from 3 and 4, and 1 from 5 and 6. And then I join these, I'll pin them together and then sew them, taking your 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you like, you can join all your pairs together making all your rows and pinning them before you start to sew. But personally, I just do the first one, and then the rest of them I do at the sewing machine. So I get the first one under my belt, again following my picture, the photograph that I've taken, make sure I've got them all in the right order before sewing. And before sewing any of the rows together, I do match them against my photograph that I took earlier to make sure I've got them all in the right order, because it is very easy to pin them together the wrong way around at this stage. So just keep checking to make sure that you are right. At your sewing machine, sew your 3 pairs together, so you should end up with 2 more seams, taking again a 1/4 inch seam allowance. No need to back tack on quilting, just sew all the way down to the end and stop, and then you should have another pair to sew together. Sew these together, removing any pins as you go, and again making sure you do take a 1/4 inch seam allowance. As you can see here, I have the rest of my pairs in their columns lined up next to my sewing machine, so I can just take 1 pair from each pile and join them together as I go along at my sewing machine. And as you can see here, I still have my photograph with me, so I can check I'm doing it right against my photograph. I'll point out at this stage that actually I did get one of my squares upside down and had to go back and change it around. I thought that all these pieces were non-directional, but I don't know whether you can see, but I think they're hippos on the blue background. I think they're hippos, I'm not really sure. Anyway, I thought they were non-directional, but actually I think they are. So after I'd sewn all of my pieces together to form the rows, I had to actually take one out and re-sew it the right way up. Anyway, continue sewing all of your pairs together to form all of your rows until all of them are done. When all of your pairs are sewn together and you have your 7 rows complete, the next step is to press our seams. Before pressing the seams, we need to set the seams. To do this, we very gently press each of the seams, each of the rows of stitching, before we press the seams towards one side. And this is called setting the seams. Setting the seam sinks the stitches into the fabric, making it easier for you to press them later. So the first row of squares, I'm going to press the seams towards the left. So as you're looking at it, I'm pressing the seam towards the left all the way along. And how I get them to go to the left is as I pull them, the seam, I pull from the right and the seam goes towards the left by itself. I've got several ways of doing this, but I'm showing you this way on this one. So I just pull it, and as you pull the fabric across your ironing mat or ironing board, if you're pulling towards the right, it makes the seam go towards the left, and then I press. So that's the first row done. I'm just going to iron that little bit there. It doesn't look very good. Just give that a quick iron. Just didn't like the look of that. So now we're on to row 2, and these are going to be pressed towards the right. But first I need to set the seams as before. And this row we're going to press the seams towards the right. So I use pretty much the same technique, apart from this time I'm going to pull the row from the left side. So I pull it from the left side, which automatically makes my seam go towards the right side, and then I press it. And then the third row, I also set the seams first, and then this time they're going to be pressed towards the left. And I continue with all the rows, ironing, pressing from left to right on alternate rows until they're all done. When all the seams of the rows have been pressed to alternate sides from left to right, it's time to join the rows. So starting with the first and second row, we're going to place the first row down on a nice flat surface. My first row is at the bottom, so there's my first row, and then I take my second row and place it on top of it with right sides facing, and we should have a seam on one side going to the left and a seam on the other side going to the right, as you can see here. When you're happy that you've got them lined up nicely, then you can pin together. Then carry on matching up all your seams along the row and pinning them all in place. Then at your sewing machine, sew, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, keeping the pins in till you're right up to them, and then pull the pin out and very carefully go over your join, trying not to move any of the fabric. And then carry on to the next join and do the same thing. Don't remove the pin too soon, but also don't sew over your pins. It's not very good for your sewing machine. Continue adding a row at a time and checking with your photograph to make sure they're all in the right order, and continue until you have all of your rows joined together. Now all your rows are complete, you can press them, and you can press them either up or down depending on your preference. But first we need to set the seams as before. Then I fold the bottom row back down, leaving the seam in place so it's pointing down. Then I press the seam from the front. Continue to press all of the rows in this way, and remember to set all of your seams before you press them. And continue until all your seams are pressed in one direction. If you prefer, you can press your seams open as I'm doing here. So just finger press them open and then using a hot iron press the seam open. It's entirely up to you which way you do it. And that's all our squares joined together, and where I'm going to leave it for this week's video. Join me next week to add the backing and the batting and do the quilting.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, could you please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.